Ladies and gentlemen, friends and fellow travelers, good morning everybody. Thanks for being here so numerous, so early in the morning. That's really great. And please join me in a very warm welcome to our speakers of today, Yael, Bartana, Theaster, and Huda, Lutfi. A very warm welcome to all of you. I'd also like to thank Marc Spiegler, Annette Schönholzer, Maike Kruse and Claudio Vogt for this wonderful collaboration and dialogue leading up to this talk, and also to the Absolute Art Bureau. We will have today a conversation about art and activism. And maybe I should quickly explain. I mean, there are many, many reasons why we felt it's extremely urgent to do that. We are living in tumultuous time, politically, economically, which I think about many different changes and movements from the Arab Spring to the situation in Greece. And I think it's a very, very important moment to reflect on this notion of art and activism, and notions also of what can be the social contract of art. Now, there's a very concrete trigger, which has nothing to do with the world situation at the moment, but more with art and politics in general, which is actually Robert Rauschenberg. Because about 7 years ago in Miami, for our Basel Miami, I interviewed Robert Rauschenberg. It was this idea of honoring Robert Rauschenberg in a sort of a big homage. And we had Alain Robbe-Grillet talking about Robert Rauschenberg, and he spoke a lot about this idea that art can change the world, about this whole idea of art as activism, and of course his whole notion of the artist as a citizen, which he coined famously in 1976. Now it's interesting that Robert Rauschenberg, who planted this seed for this idea of the panel today, has now actually a foundation has been created in his memory, and they have just launched a award, kind of grant, which is called Artists as Activists. So this is very much a kind of a prolongation, one can say, of this seed, Rauschenberg planted. And something we're going to discuss in the panel, of course. I'm very interested what are the kind of, inspirations for artists today, inspirations from the past, maybe, of positions of art and activism. There are many other topics which, will be relevant today. The idea also of reality production, artists working in the real world. Furthermore, also the idea of infiltration. Felix González Torres once told me, if we talk about art and activism, he saw himself always as both, an artist and an activist. He said the artist is always an infiltrator, the artist is always a spy. And another topic, certainly also the idea of what that could mean then for the art world, and particularly, is it for art today relevant to have both, to be actually in the real world but also in the art world? What does it mean to always come back? Because I think all the speakers today have a practice which is both activism in the real world, but they keep coming back into the art world. And that obviously leads us to the topic, what can the art world do? What is then the role of the art world? And last but not least, we will then address what could that mean for institution building? What could be institutions for the 21st century? So that's really a little bit a survey of the topics we're going to address. Apologies from Santiago Cirugueda. Due to a family accident, he cannot be with us today. We wish him all the best and hope that he can be with us at a future panel here at Art Basel. It's now my great, great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Yael Bartana, who is an artist who works with video, photography, film, and installation, and very much investigates her country's struggle for identity. Her big project of the last couple of years is the Jewish Renaissance movement in Poland project, which is really between an utopia and a dystopia. And there's actually one thing which is interesting, which Santiago Cirugueda said when he was interviewed by Christian Viveros Faune for his article he wrote for the art newspaper about the panel today. Santiago said that such projects between art and activism can't just last a month or two like an exhibition. They have another kind of duration, which is very much the case, I think, for Yael's project. So Yael, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. The Jewish Renaissance movement in Poland is a project that is, it's actually kind of an imaginary movement that tries to challenge history and politics. The specificity of Jewish and Polish relationship going back to 15th century, that was the starting point of the project, my project started actually in 2006. And the main idea of the project is to, on two levels. One, to how artistic practice can actually create possibilities for social change and challenge history. And the most important is the possibilities for social change. So to take a very specific history and to see how that affects the consequences of that history today and how we can possibly change. And the other thing is how can actually the possibilities of alternatives and to take the social real, the art as a kind of a social sculpture to engage people from diverse backgrounds. So that, for me, what is most important, it's not just the duration of the project, but the possibilities to engage people from diverse backgrounds, from activism, from art, from the academia, from intellectuals, and people that actually are very much involved personally in the specific histories. Or, so that actually requires a very long process. And believe that there is the possibilities for social ties, something that we do not experience today in this capitalist, individualist world that is based on competition. So I try to see how we can actually, as artists, create alternatives to that. This will be my briefly introduction to the project.
And can you maybe tell us a little bit more about this whole idea how you see it to produce reality? Because at the beginning, when I heard about the project first, it sounded very much like a fiction, but however, with time advancing, I was wondering to which extent the project has a dimension of actually producing the real.
Right, the whole project is based on political imagination. However, when you start to actually work on such project and involve people, there's some intertwined relationship between peoples and personal stories that make it very real. And I will give an example. One of the persons involved in the project is a woman that Holocaust survivors who moved actually to Israel and stays in Israel, does not want to move to Poland, but she uses the project to state that she would like to create a social justice because her citizenship was lost by the Polish state. So somehow involving people that are actually suffered from the history allows to create the imaginative into the real. And I have more examples for people stating their demands from the movement and demands some sort of a fantasy that goes back into the Israel political, Israel and Palestinian conflict and the issue of the right of return. So what does it actually mean, inviting 3.3 million Jews back to Poland? It raises the question of the right of return to Palestine and in that way to create another possibility.
And can you maybe say a few more things about, because you say that the whole political process, you say that it was trying to challenge the reality in the Middle East, but also in Europe, to kind of challenge it in both places, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah. So I see the state of Israel as a direct product of the European, of the Second World War, and the consequences of that war, and that created a situation which is, today we are still suffering from, and there is a direct responsibility, and today also that how Europe and the United States are influencing, how affecting the politics. And so somehow to step out from for 10 years I worked in Israel, and I thought I would like to step out and to see the involvement of Europe in today politics and how I can actually request responsibility for that history. And so that there is, I mean, I see ourselves as a colony of European colony in the Middle East. So that's I see a direct link.
Now, a last question is, at the moment there is this project you have in Berlin, and the idea, as you told me when we met last time, was the idea of a congress. And you said in an interview, the movement is imaginary at the moment, but now we need the people to establish it. This is why we have the congress. A movement cannot be maintained by one person. And I think that's kind of interesting, because also something we can discuss later in the conversation, because it's obviously this idea, if you think about art and activism, very often that means, how can art be a movement? Are there movements? Are there manifestos? Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about the movement, your movement, and how it's going to, further advance with the Congress?
Okay, so last month we had a first Congress of the movement in Berlin Biennale. It was at the Hebel Theater, that has an history, 20th century history, that also held many different conventions and conferences. And that was the first time for me, first of all, to break a hierarchy between the people actually that came across. So there was a democratic situation where people were able to raise their demands from the movement and somehow to create an agenda. So I invited different people. It was an international group that was asked, each participant was asked to actually come up with one demand for change. So it was about reformic possibilities. And every demand was allowed to discuss for 15 minutes. And then right after there was actually a voting. So we had somehow allowing in art to create a democracy, something that we do not experience in politics. So the possibility that people can actually vote against or for the demand created the agenda of the movement. And one of the, for example, a demand would be what has to change in Poland in order to welcome 3.3 million Jews. So that created this whole discussion about the Catholic Church, and somehow that they have to break the contract with the Vatican to allow actually Jews to be comfortable based in Poland. That's one that talks about imagination, the possibilities to imagine, and that brought also the problems in Poland and the patriarchy and so forth. We talked about really serious political, social issues.
Great, thank you.
So that to use the imagination in order to talk about real demands.
Thank you very much, and we will explore that further in the conversation. It's, I think, a very key point, something also Helena Producciones mentioned a lot in Colombia at the moment, in their form of art and activism, when they say we need to go beyond interventionism and kind of activate, as you say, civic imagination. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Theaster Gates, who studied at Iowa State University, University of Cape Town, and Iowa, is that correct? At Iowa State University. He's actually a professor at the University of Chicago. He was born in '73 in Chicago, and his work has a lot to do with Chicago. It's got to do something with, actually, very interestingly, yesterday Jacques Herzog, the architect of Herzog de Meuron, said here in Basel to me, when he said that really one of the key things of the 21st century is how we can be specific. What can be specific forms of activism in relation to a city. Theaster has had many museum exhibitions. It includes the Smart Museum of Art in Seattle, the Milwaukee Art Museum, the Ruby Museum of Art, Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston, the Whitney Biennale. And for those of you who haven't been yet to Kassel, it's very urgent to go to Kassel to Documenta to see his work there. Theaster?
Thank you. When I was asked to be a part of this talk, I had some resistance to the word activism. I felt that my practice actually did not take the aesthetic form of protest or activism, and I had really specific thoughts about what it meant for a person to declare themselves an activist, and I didn't line up with that group. That in moments of protest, it is not my position to necessarily go out in the form of a demonstration and respond to a political moment in that way. Maybe that's not my way because I didn't grow up with a protesting family. In a way, I think that that the idea of activism, maybe in the same way as art, was embedded in a deeper set of politics that were probably more closely aligned with the Black church and the kind of need for service that grew out of a particular kind of religious setting that doesn't exist in the same way anymore, that was part of my youth and that I haven't been able to find again. That instead of activism, what I felt I was challenging in the name of the talk was that artists are real people who live in a real world that is very big, and that sometimes the world really requires our intellectual capacity and our creativity to respond to really specific moments. And I want to be able to do that in the forms that seem most appropriate for me. And sometimes the most appropriate form for talking about poverty and injustice in a city, that form would be like if I could put it in a museum and talk about that form, the problem through that platform. That lots of people might know of a particular problem, and the consciousness raising might compel people to do something. And that was one way that I could be gestural and leverage the museum and kind of art platform to say something. Sometimes the things would seem aligned with something political, but sometimes the thing could be benign. It's the thing that I want to navel gaze about, and I think both of those have the right. But then there were other times where I felt the training that I've been given, that we've been given, the hunger to connect deeply with real topics would allow me to do something that was actually beyond the museum or the art world. And so sometimes without telling the art world that there were these other things happening, other things were happening that just had me planted in a place doing things. Now, it's great that that you can get praised and awarded and acknowledged for the things that you do, but sometimes that creates more complications. And so sometimes you just have to do quiet things. One of the things that I really am concerned about, I think about like our intellectual leaders, I think about basketball players, I think about art stars who start out and the world comes to believe in the work that they do because they're doing it in a particular place. And over time, they get further and further removed from the thing that gave them value, or that started the work, or that got them excited and active and gave them fresh ideas. And that distancing from the things that you actually really believe in, and kind of ending up in this more imaginary space, this distance is something that I'm very interested in my practice. Not the this or the that of art, but how that distance happens. And if there's a way that I can continue to come back to the thing that kind of initially got me hungry, that as all these other opportunities come, if I could continue to think about poverty in the city, new economies, creativity that happens in unexpected places, these really kind of base things that everyone should have access to, learning how to think in the creative, because then that might become a survival tactic in the real world. That as these opportunities come and they conflate, I feel compelled to have these things rub up in a way. And it seems like the rubbing up of access and additional resource and one's ability to leverage that, if I would just stay in Monaco, this wouldn't be interesting. But if I could bring Monaco to Dorchester, then maybe something more interesting could happen than if I was only always at Dorchester or if I was only always in Monaco. And this way of saying that it's not just the museum, it's not just a patron, it's not just a collector, it's not just exploiting the idea of being committed to a cause, but it's when all those things get to mix up that new forms might develop, that a new expanded artistic practice might evolve. And so in the case of the project with Documenta, there was a building, and the building had been abandoned for a long time. It would have been very easy for me to concentrate on the history of war and the political in relationship to this building. But I decided instead to choose a kind of formalism. That is, I would think about abandonment, how buildings become abandoned, why, and then think about reactivation. And then see what happens as a result of the thing that I'm most interested in. That is, how do we shift the context of a thing? How do we take this war-torn, dilapidated building in Kassel with this this economically underdetermined place in Chicago? How do we take these two buildings that are abandoned for very, very different reasons, flatten them, leverage the platform of Documenta to say that the question of war and the question of blight creates abandonment? Can we leverage Documenta, this great cultural apparatus, to talk about these things, but to think specifically about two buildings? Let's restore the buildings as some poetic act, and then see what happens with the buildings. And it's the seeing what happens when you bring 9 artists and young people, some of which who had never left the country, to a place like Kassel to help them become mature. When you work with a group of people in Germany for whom they're always only painting walls, and you put them in the most important thing happening in Germany. When you take an unemployed German worker and you put them in the most important cultural event happening in Germany, in the country, in the international art world, and then say to them, you've just become a part of a very important cultural moment. You're not just the help, you're not just a plasterer or a painter, that you're actually most important and central to this work. That what's happening is that the work becomes a gift, not only for me, but for the 75 people who are part of the work. And this idea that it becomes a gift because we've taken this thing that exists over here, where one kind of labor has no value, and saying, no, actually, you have as much value as the thing that you're working on. And so it's been really, really fun to resist the notion of being an activist and really just concentrate on working and needing people to help me with the work. And activism, like art, might be the byproduct of just doing the stuff that you believe in.
So one could say it's a daily practice.
Yeah.
It's a daily practice, and this daily practice has parallel realities, as you say, and you do things in Kassel, but then you do also things in the city. And I was very fascinated to read when you talk in interviews about healing the cities. When you sort of use this notion of healing, you say not just painting murals, sort of political art, referring to the muralists, to Siqueiros and many others, but actually to heal the cities, to sort of heal what you call a spatial sickness. And in the same interview you say you've kind of got a problem with urbanism and particularly with architecture, because usually you just have one has the name of one architect or one urbanist, and it's not really inclusive for all those people who work on these projects. And I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that, about your background in urbanism, and about how you see this notion of healing.
Yeah, so when I was trained, when I went to school, I thought that architecture or urban planning was actually the cure for the city. that there was a way in which design or art, I thought by profession, that there might be something ethical built into architecture. That is, architects would always hunger to not only build the building, but build a building that had a kind of integrity and a value for lots of people. Unfortunately, I realized that urban planning was actually without ethics, and that the planning practice that I practiced, it really often just benefited the folk who had the most political clout. So that as an urban planner, I felt myself working against people who I really wanted to work for. That I had to abandon governmental planning, abandon a particular kind of private planning, private architectural, private design practice, because it wasn't inclusive enough. And so maybe healing has something to do with the idea that in addition to our skill sets, the question of a personal ethic could live alongside our personal aesthetic, and that there should be some ambition for why we make what we make, beyond just the neutrality of making. But that making is actually not neutral. That making is always claiming value somewhere. And so, you know, if you look at when people talk about Detroit, or they talk about Chicago, or we think about Liverpool, it's easy to say, yeah, there was a loss of an economic center. The industries went to other countries. There was a failure by the left or the right to advocate for this or that. Or you could look at this as a kind of larger problem of at what point do we stop caring about some people and only care for others? At what point does transportation only work for those people in the city and not for others? And I think that if there's a way in which, not from a governmental level, but like if I have a 5-passenger car and I go to work every day, can I just think more about my neighbors? You know, it's like really simple things that might enact this. And so, you know, just to go back to the Huguenot house, I think that in a way, I'm not from Kassel. I'm only there, at least I think I'm only there temporarily. Maybe I'll move to Kassel now. But what we were able to do was to say that this building, with its 45 rooms, has room for lots of people. And that actually people want to come and occupy those rooms if you make it available. Or I could say the building is only available for me and a small team of collectors and curators, and we keep it the private club. But it was way sexier to have the building open up and have, and I don't know if this necessarily needs to constitute an art practice as much as it is what happens as a byproduct of production is that things become generative and convivial sometimes.
Great, that gives us so many topics then for the conversation. I've got the great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Huda Lutfi. We met earlier in Egypt and actually in Cairo. Huda has had many exhibitions in Cairo and all over the world, in the Townhouse Gallery, as well as in many museums. Her practice has developed a lot with collage and activism, and it's actually in a conversation we had with Negar Azimi, whom I'd like to thank as well here for all the wonderful conversation we had in the build-up to this panel, that Negar was telling me that Huda, you have actually more given time to the revolution in Egypt, and that you just felt an urgency to really engage with that. So this sort of whole idea of this energy and how that inspired you, as Negar said, is such an important matter. So, Huda, please.
I don't think that it was only me as an artist. I don't think of myself also as an activist per se. I mean, I'm a citizen, and I happen to live in downtown Cairo, very close to Tahrir. And when the last January huge protests happened, 1.5 years ago, all of us went out on the street, so we didn't think, this is activism or art. And what was so amazing was that during these 18 days in Tahrir, ordinary Egyptian people were expressing themselves brilliantly and in a very creative way without thinking that this is art or contemporary art. So this is what kept us going every single day. These creative expressions were communicated through colloquial Egyptian language, colloquial poetry, slogans, songs. I saw installations that were extremely powerful of people standing, wrapped up in as though they in like a shroud with writing saying, "This is my coffin that I will give to the revolution and against social injustice, against despotism." I saw installations made up of spontaneous installations made up of stones, in writing, expressing, revolutionary slogans. And so, I mean, for us as artists, we saw art taking place in the street, expressed by people who don't think of themselves as artists. This was a fantastic lesson for all of us and very inspiring. And since this 1.5 years, we have all constantly been going out on the street, but we do have time also to do specific community projects. Particularly artists have done several projects, and I've been part of that, going to specific popular poor areas. A group of artists going, for example, to Imbaba, where to a specific street in this popular area where a martyr where there's the family of the martyr wanted to commemorate his martyrdom, and what we did was to create murals on the facades of all the houses in that street, but that was not really the aim, of the project. The aim was, to bring healing again to that street, to that area, and to see, how this model can generate, other similar community projects. We were, the children of the street, were working with us, also doing painting and participating in creating their own murals. We ate together, we talked again, together. So this community project also went to another area in the city, again, a popular poor area. And Cairo is known to be one of the most crowded, polluted, and sorry to say, dirtiest cities in the world. And we wanted to create a sense of community and interaction that we can, do something about our neighborhood. So we took that project to Fagala as well. And there it developed more because the artists and the neighbors were planting trees in the community while interacting, all the time in discussions with the members of that of that neighborhood. So it was also about the interaction, with the community as well, not necessarily as artists and bringing, what the concepts of contemporary art and so on, but just doing that on a very, spontaneous level, without, imposing, any conceptual ideas, on that kind of interaction. Also, since the last 1.5 years, I've been engaged in a long-term workshop related to, sponsored by the Art Center, Townhouse Art Center. And it's a series of workshops that, there are 4 workshops. One that trains the participants to use the mobile phones. And mobile phones have been, like an artistic tool that has been used to document, the happenings, the events that have been taking place during the last year and a half. So, but that project was specifically geared to, like the use of the mobile to bring more awareness to what's happening to women on the streets in the cities of Egypt, the harassment, the harassment, sexual harassment on the streets, which is a phenomena that have been coming up more and more. So, like the training of participants to just use a simple tool like the mobile to work, to do like some video work on, against, and against harassment. The other workshop is to train, writers, young writers, or maybe aspiring writers in a workshop on creative writing, to use that as a form of expression, to communicate their own ideas. The third workshop is, like the deconstruction of myths and symbols, because, like we live with taboos and myths, that we cannot question and challenge. So that workshop, was geared to, like to do that, to deconstruct these myths that we live in, like, the army and the people are one, and the army and the people are not one in Egypt. The army has been one of the major players in leading the counter-revolution in Egypt and defending the regime's, status quo, the Mubarak regime's status quo. And the workshop, also the fourth workshop has been is one that that focuses on media criticism, and the media in Egypt played a very harmful role in distorting the image of the revolutionaries, presenting them as thugs, as infiltrators, as spies, as terrorists and anarchists and so on to the public. So, like the media criticism is extremely important. And of course, the social media in Egypt has been extremely active to establish alternative media practices to expose the media lies of the Egyptian official television, state television. And one of these is the cinema. It started one of these movements, alternative movements, media movements, is to take the media to the street, videos, video projections in the public space, which has been reclaimed by the protesters and the revolutionaries, fortunately, and to project, and expose the lies of the official media and the military council that rules Egypt until today, by showing their own version, of what happened and how the army is actually perpetrating violence against the protesters and not protecting them. The workshop on media criticism that I've been working on since several months ago and will continue till September has proposed, a project to work on the language of the revolution, which is like an amazing, inventive, and cross-fertilized language that keeps up by the day, with the events of what's happening, in Egypt. And we want to create, what we call an online open dictionary of the revolution, examining the language, the words, and the phrases that become popular and viral in the social network and the media, examining, the important places in which significant events have taken place in various cities, examining the figures that have become important in the revolutionary or the counter-revolutionary movement, examining important events, that took place. That is, it's creating an open archive that we hope to put online and then ask the public to upload their own perspectives, on these various categories and classifications. That's it. It's enough.
Thank you so much for them. Thank you very much. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you, maybe, because Theaster was talking really about these parallel realities of the practice, and you were saying before as well, you kind of move in and out the art world. And one of the things I omitted when I introduced you, which is actually very, very important to say, is that you are trained as a cultural historian, and that actually art already, is your second career. And that I only became aware of that reading really your big monograph, which the Third Line published, earlier this year, which for the first time brings together, your many decades of work. And what becomes clear there as well is that there is your work as a cultural historian, but then like our two previous speakers, you also have this connection to architecture, to society, to urbanism, because basically you found expression in architecture, you researched also mural paintings, and you built 2 houses. You actually, exercise this professional architecture. So really, to cut the long story short, I was very curious to complete the picture. If you can tell us about these parallel realities, you as a cultural historian, urbanist, architect.
As a cultural historian, I always was communicating a version of history that is alternative to or counter to the official history that we suffered from at school, which is like a history that is fixed and that creates the assumption that there's one truth, historical truth. So in my teaching and my writing, I try to create a history that has been absent, that challenges and criticizes the status quo. And particularly, I have focused on gender, more specifically on women's role, women's participation in the historical memory, which of course is very neglected in our official history. And as an architect, I don't know if I can call an architect. My brother is an architect, but I have an interest in Adobe architecture, like an architecture that situates itself in the contextual environment, that uses friendly environmental material, and that takes into consideration, of course, the climate of the area. So the 2 houses I built are in the oasis of Fayoum, in which I worked with local workers who really have very little idea of how to build. And so we trained along. I mean, I wasn't the only one who did that. Lots of artists as well went to this small village in Fayoum, oasis, and we worked with the local workers. And it wasn't like we're going to train you. It's just that we were working together, and in the process, again, you just exchange ideas. It's done on a very informal, unpretentious, without funding or anything. It's just like these individual efforts that accumulates knowledge and passes on knowledge. And now these very young workers are passing on their knowledge, the knowledge that they have learned, and they are passing on knowledge to me now because they are doing more work in that field, and therefore they have much more experience. So it's fantastic, you know, like that the young these young people who worked with us are now teaching us, you know. So it's like an interactive and a two-way process that is taking place. Did I do anything else? What else?
Well, it covers it very nicely. Thank you so much. So thanks a lot. And I mean, Yael, Theaster, and Huda, the three of you really describe projects which all, you know, are what Fernand Braudel might call long durational. There is a, you know, a long duration in all of these three practices and your ongoing projects. And actually, this whole idea, what I mentioned initially with the quote of Santiago Sirogeda, who isn't here with us in person, but he's here, you know, with his thoughts and with this quote that he says, activism can't just last a month or two, like an exhibition. There is another form of duration in it. I was just wondering if, you know, you could maybe we could start with Yael, talk a little bit more about this long durational aspect of the project.
Hearing the speakers today, I think what is very interesting for me is the issue of urgency. I mean, just what you described now with the going to the street, there was a sense of urgency to go to the street and join and create a social interaction with the politics in the street, what was going on in Egypt. So for me, one of the things that the duration, it has to do with the importance to actually be aware of what is the most urgent conditions that I need to react to. And so I see myself as an agent to the movement. So I founded the movement. I'm actually an agent, and my role is to try to make sure that we somehow relate to what happens in the world today, what happens in reality, and how can we reply to the conversation, the political the politics today. So and that takes time. That needs a process. That needs a belief that actually we can actually involve more people. And what is for me what was very interesting, that actually I did not start the project by creating Jewish Renaissance movement in Poland. I wanted to really first and foremost to trigger an awareness and to think of what if history. So can an artist create history? Can artists create reality? Can we implement our ideas actually into the reality we're living it? And first, so the idea was just to throw an idea and to see if somebody actually catch the idea. So in my case, the one who was able to actually, catch the idea was the minister of the Poland, culture minister, that actually agreed that I will represent Poland in Venice Biennial. So once he decided that this project, the Polish trilogy, will represent Poland, he created a reality for the movement. So he accepted and shows that we actually Poland. We changed. We are in a much more open society. We wish to have a multicultural society. Today is like 100% Polish, but there is a possibilities that we can be, So that was for me very important to let things happen and roll and create fantasies and therefore to create possibilities.
Yeah, to this point about urgency, it seems that there are times when the urgency is born because something external happens, like an important historical moment, political moment happens, and you can't help. You feel compelled to be a part of it. And then sometimes the urgency is internal, like it stems from belief, and and then in some cases, the urgency is like situational. That is, someone's asked you to do something. So let's take St. Louis. I was asked to respond to Gordon Matta Clark by Emmy Pulitzer and the Pulitzer Foundation. And the response initially was, well, Theaster, you like abandoned buildings. Gordon Matta Clark likes abandoned buildings. Why don't you cut up a building and you can make something really nice happen? And instead of responding to the modernist moment with another modernist moment, I just thought this could be a great opportunity to leverage these resources to actually restore a building. In fact, maybe restore the building that is in most need of restoration. And if we're able to pull this off, because the situational opportunity allows me to activate belief, then what that might do in the neighborhood might be much more important than being able to trump Gordon Matta Clark with a larger this or that. But what happened as a result of restoring the building was that the people who I worked with on the north side of St. Louis, they were like, well, what are we going to do next? And the principal of the school, and the parishioner of the Catholic Church, and all of a sudden I found myself 1 year into a project ready to say goodbye, but then there was this whole contingency of people who were ready to, that something like it had gone from this imaginary world, this contrived 2-month opportunity, to something that people actually wanted to live with and continue to live with. So I couldn't leave St. Louis. And it's like you end up kind of accumulating, you end up accumulating. That is, you have to figure out what your capacity is, and then beyond your capacity, how do you take these projects that really, if you choose to start to work with people, you can't bail. And it may mean then that you really temper the number of projects that you do, but it does mean that the 2 months is like the Big Bang version, but the real heart of it doesn't come until real intimate relationships develop. And it may happen that projects no longer need you. That is, you activate a moment where an Adobe house can be made, and then they become professional Adobe house makers. That it doesn't need you anymore. And I can only hope that happens, because I can only live in so many cities at one time.
And this idea actually, which is about accumulating, you end up accumulating, has also to do, I suppose, with your archive projects, because they're about accumulating, and they're also having a longer duration than a year or two. That's the long term, no?
It's open and online, and I think that it's very important because, again, we have like a monopoly on disseminating information by the state institutions, so it's extremely important to establish alternative media and archival practices, in which the revolutionaries, if you want, or those who have a different perspective have the ability, the possibility, of uploading their own, ways of seeing things. I think that. I just need to say that if one is an activist, it's not so much about activism, but it's about a state of mind that seeks to resist and struggle against social injustice, against despotism, and against humiliating the dignity of the human being. I think that is a state of mind that is universal, and I think that if that state of mind is always there, in different situations, however and when they arise, and I think that's the moment of being active and interacting with in real life. I think that's the important thing for me, is that state of mind.
In this point that Huda's making, it's a really important one, because I think that there are times when cultural activity is regulated through institutions, and institution to institution, the chance for an intimate encounter, a direct engagement with someone, that opportunity fails, that let's create a big thing and always people are just kind of this. but I think that there are times when an artist chooses to engage a topic and then that interaction becomes one-on-one or 1-2 or 1-3, that these intimate moments of engagement where not only am I creating a metaphysical, fantastical new political regime, I'm actually meeting with one person at a time to tell them about my artistic ideas, and that those engagements then create belief between two people. And I think it's really at that kind of more intimate level that artists who invent or develop institutional moments can actually have more affect than big institutions that are always trying to create great public moments.
Now, one thing which is very fascinating in relation to that is, when I grew up in Switzerland as a kid, I went to museums like every day almost, and I was obsessed by museums. And then when I was around 14, 15, one day, I read in the newspaper that Joseph Beuys would come to the Lake of Constance, and he'd do a lecture about the Green Party and his sort of form of activism. And for me, it was an incredible moment. And obviously, certain things you mentioned this morning made me think of Joseph Beuys, this kind of whole idea of social sculpture. And I was just curious. Very often we invent the future made out of inspirations from the past. I was just wondering, for your kind of work and these wonderful projects you were describing, what are artists from the past who give you courage, who inspire you? We avoid the word heroes, but kind of inspirations.
Well, for me, you just mentioned one, Joseph Beuys, but also very much Nancy Spiro and Louise Bourgeois, because...
Well, I have a new, kind of new hero, which unfortunately died, Christoph Schlingensief, who has, I recently saw a fantastic documentary about his work in Africa, about the opera village. That is, I think, one of the, today I would say one of my favorite artists. Also living in Germany and to be learning now closely the German society, I think he did such an amazing artwork. So.
And it's connected to Beuys,
Yeah,
because I knew
absolutely, yeah.
Schlingensief well, and when we once spoke, I asked him who is his, inspiration. The same question I'm now asking you. And Schlingensief said Beuys, and I said why? And he said when he was very little, when he was a boy, and he grew up in Germany, and he sort of. His father had, I think, a pharmacy in a small German town, a drogerie, and was part of the Rotary Club. And one day, Joseph Beuys came to the Rotary Club of this little town in Germany, and the father kind of came home and was completely confused. He said it's the only time he's ever seen his father destabilized, because Joseph Beuys announced to the local Rotary Club that at a certain date, a few years later, capitalism will end. And and so little Christoph said he was really so inspired by that. He thought, if Joseph Beuys can destabilize his father, that's really what he wants to become. So there is a connection there between Beuys.
Joseph Beuys would be, of course, my first. Especially with creating the Green Party, so they're thinking of that. I can actually one day maybe become a party. So.
And Theaster, your inspirations?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Fred Hampton and Stokely Carmichael, kind of leaders in the Black Panther Party, who probably would never be seen as artists. But when I think about art in relationship to the political, and I think about their ability to rally via the performance of Black radicalism, a particular kind of cultural, social change, they stick out as kind of important people in my life. And then lately, just because I had been thinking a lot about the invention of alternative spaces at a level that conceptually might challenge, it seems like I've been doing a lot of thinking about Marcel Brothers, and asking myself very hard questions about what participation in the art apparatus means in relationship to all of the other things that I do and believe in,
Great, thank you very much. Before we open it to your questions, I've got one or two last questions. One thing I wanted to ask you is to come back to this Helena Producciones, conversation, because obviously there is such a important sort of discussion around art and activism also in Colombia. And I was in the jury of this Pistoletto Foundation Award, which we awarded, to Helena Producciones, and we were actually discussing a lot at that moment about this whole idea of interventionism, and on the other hand, civic imagination, because obviously they invent this festival in Cali, and it is not only an intervention into the community, but it has a lot to do with civic imagination, no? And I mean, I think the three of you touched on that. It's implicit in what the three of you do, but I was just wondering if you can maybe make it a little bit more explicit, and if you could talk a little bit, if you would agree with that, and how you see this potential of civic imagination in such projects you're doing.
Yeah, in some ways, maybe the project that I'm engaged in on Dorchester, which is the reactivation of a series of abandoned buildings that happen to be on one block, was that I really hope that the artistic gesture might help to create a model for how the city might think about the 75,000 abandoned buildings that are in Chicago and the 135,000 empty lots that we don't know what to do with. That in a way, if an artist could insert herself into an important moment that they believe in, and then that insertion, as a result, people become curious about it and they ask you to talk about it, and you talk with your colleagues in other professions about it, that then the city might reimagine, oh, is it possible to use this building for something other than a residential unit when it's supposed to be only residential? Or could local political activity actually help to invent new ways of governance in a local community? But I don't have to worry so much about the models that spew as a result. I really have to just concentrate on making this thing the best thing I can make it. And so I think that interventions in the civic sphere are as important, if not more important, as the interventions we do to help make the calendar of a museum more robust.
Thank you. Yael and Huda, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm thinking of education in schools, and I'm thinking that how can such a project can be implemented in school, in the curriculum of learning about history, learning about particular Israel history, but Europe, and how we can actually create an alternative to the narrative, something that you mentioned before, the possibilities of to open up the brainwashed citizens of so that somehow that would be the most I would say an achievement somehow to enter. Yeah.
The civic imagination. I think the many projects that have been happening, led by whether they're artists or not, work that takes itself to in the public space, it inspires, this idea of the civic imagination. I mean, there's one artist, for example, who put up a poster on the streets asking people, if you were a president, what would you do? And then the question on top, and then there is blank space beneath, and it allows people, to think of how to take initiative to think about and reflect what would they do if they were to become the president, or the leader of a certain, institution. So it's examples like that, I think, inspire, the people on the street to think in different ways, not necessarily that we want, a hero to save us, that they themselves can do it. And I think the projects that, the many community projects that take place also inspire that spirit of people, thinking in different ways that they can take action. And they don't have to wait for this stagnant, bureaucratic, rigid government that we have in Egypt. Very old, and it needs to be changed. That they don't have to wait for that bureaucracy, to do things for them, and maybe to take things in their hands more.
One last question. We mentioned the movement before, the notion of, Yael talked about her movement. I think it's interesting if you look at 20th century avant-gardes, that in the early 20th century, very often activism was connected also to kind of collective movements, and those movements came alongside manifestos, and we still have manifestos in the neo-avant-gardes. In the 60s, there's a lot of manifestos. Earlier this week, we had actually Pine and Mac here in this very room talking about Zero, and their kind of manifesto they wrote. Now, throughout the 20th century, there's obviously been many doubts about utopias, because utopias did many bad things in the 20th century, and totalitarian things. And so there was actually a thought, maybe of Ernst Bloch, that no longer to talk about utopias, but to still see a potentially an utopic thinking of some sort. So really, I just wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit more about these notions about utopia, utopic thinkings, manifestos. I was curious if three of you have a manifesto, or if your projects have a manifesto.
Well, my movement has a manifesto, actually. A kind of declaration of what we hope to do. But I have many doubts, of course. I am a believer in such a movement, but the possibility that it can create. But of course, Utopia has dystopia, so that's the other side to every project. But I'm interested in Utopia more that it actually allows possibilities to imagine, to the possibilities of imagination, and some would say that we are living in utopian time, actually, that this will change probably very soon. So, but yeah, so for me, most important in Utopia, the creating of the change, like possibility for change, and that actually happens. Of course, the results are very bad, but in 20th century, but there was a massive changes. So.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I use the word belief a lot because I think that belief is like a muscle that if used, it has the capacity to make one's actions stronger, even when there's fewer reasons to believe. And so maybe the practice just kind of, if I were to choose a politic, it would have something to do with one's ability to stay, which might even seem related slightly to occupy or something. One's ability to stay for a long time in a place, one's willingness to fight to stay in a place. And I think that's, but in a lighter way, 2 years ago, I created an organization called the Association of Named Negro American Potters. A total hoax, but one born out of a desire to go to a national conference on ceramics, arts, and education and actually see more than 2 black people there. That it seemed there were these gaps in the contemporary art world, in the craft world, and the culturally literate world. And the gaps had everything to do with both race and class. And that the association, ANAP, NAPI for short, would be a way by which I would graft people into my union. That there would be an increased value for hand ability and a dissemination of that hand ability. And it seems like a modest farce in relationship to the reoccupation of Israel or Poland. But nonetheless, this thing kind of actually gave me the courage to create a union seal And then people would say, I want to be a part of your nappy organization. You know, that people might believe in anything.
What's nappy?
Nappy, I'll tell you later.
And Huda, your manifesto or
My manifesto. I was just telling someone that, even while I think of myself as fortunate, a fortunate Egyptian citizen. I've had the chance to be a professor at the university, an artist, and involved in interesting projects and so on. That I suffer, and I'm not happy that I see other people not able to live in the same way. Like, I don't think I want to be in a society in which other people are not able to get a good education, a good health care, good housing, decent, let's say. That the majority of Egyptians are not able to do that, and the majority of people in Africa and then the Middle East and the world actually are not able to do that. So that's my manifesto. I want to be in a society where this is available to almost all people.
Thank you very, very much. It's the moment now to open it for your questions. For question here, if you might, I can have the mic, please.
Okay. I'm Rafael Radi from Brazil, and I appreciate very much the discussion when you talk about boys and Utopia. What I will see, and this year we are commemorating 50 years of Fluxus movement. And when I was sitting here, I saw that one artist has a background from Jewish religion, another one from US Catholic, and another one Islamic. And I remember concern German writer from the 18th century, Lessing, that wrote Nathan the Wiser. Do you think, my question is now, do you think that through the movements that boys with the created actions and Fluxus movements through planting trees in Kassel that you can see until today, and in Egypt that you are trying to talk with your neighborhood to plant some trees, or in Israel to Palestine with the wall that blocked the contact to each other from transfer directly. I don't mean contact in the digital way, but direct contact confront of values. Do you think that the movement of the art that we are talking here about right now has to increase or develop to more global consequences, including this utopia concern religions?
Yeah. If we were to just talk about, if we were to use boys as a way for examining the possibility within an artistic practice, I think, and to reflect on Fluxus, that there's a way in which we can call it art all the way, and then we get to a threshold where things become blurry. And then it's like, okay, blurry. And to the extent that things are blurry and they're attempting to deal with the real world, that is, they become so blurry that new real political organizations want to branch off, or fights ensue, or real people want to be a part of a revolution, Fluxus, that it goes to a point where it is no longer recognizable as art. But it doesn't mean that the part of its history that was born here, as it goes through this blurriness, doesn't continue to be born of its origin. And I think that there are ways in which political movements that are born of political movements often have a trajectory, but there are some times in which the way that a creative is able to engage the political, go through the blurry, and maybe enter the political or enter the spiritual, might have resounding consequence that the spiritual alone couldn't have or the political alone can't have. And so the beauty of wearing the cloak of art is that we bring not only all of our orthodoxies to the table as religious practitioners or artistic practitioners, but art should have the capacity to also give us the ability to creatively adapt and mutate so that as we go through blurriness and into the political or spiritual, something else happens that the political or spiritual couldn't allow.
Yael and Huda, do you want to add something?
No, I think this is fantastic what he said.
Are there more questions? Yes, if you can have the mic, please. There is a question here in the second row, on the third row on the left.
Can I hire you for the movement?
I was going to ask, within the context of the Egyptian uprising, and also in relationship to staying with a project over the extended time period, I'd read something in the New York Times yesterday about how a lot of the young liberals had felt frozen out of the process in relationship to the development of the new republic in a way. So I guess I was wondering, how should artistic practice, respond or change as the circumstances change to meet new challenges? Because that also, you can stay in the same place for a long time, but sometimes you need to be doing different things, I think, in relationship to that. And how do you identify those things and sort of react to them, I guess?
Well, I think you just have you have to just test it all the time. It's a continuous interactive process that you have. You have to constantly respond and experiment with what's happening at the moment. So I can't say predict what these specific moments are going to be like, but I think that it's a process that is in constant flux, and it keeps changing all the time. And now we have a situation where there is a reinstating of the old regime with a new face. And we just have to continue our resistance to this, unjust status quo. So, however, ways are, adopted, and I don't know. It just depends on how we live it, and how the moment, tells us what to do. Because I think it's not a decision, that we take. But it's more, what the moment tells us, how do we live that moment, and how we respond to it, and how we are part of that moment. So it's a struggle, it's a continuous process, continuous struggle of resistance. I think that, and that's not just the artists or the activists. I think that the January, I don't know if I can call it revolution or not, but the January protests have brought about a major change on the ground. Not necessarily in the political structure, because I think they're deaf and they're dead, and they're, they are only interested in preserving, their status quo. But on the ground, I think all Egyptians are talking about politics and what to do. And that's in contrast to a situation where people were in a state of denial before. I went into a major transformation. The last 1 year and a half has been an intensive crash course in Egyptian and global politics. So, and it continues to be that. So we just have to continue the resistance.
Are there more questions for our speakers? Yeah, I see a question here on the right.
Hi. With the specific background of the panelists, I'm just curious to hear the perspective from the panelists what is the role, or is there a role for the artists in the Middle East to promote peace in the region?
Of course. The artists to promote peace. I don't know. You promote peace when there is social justice and when there's no discrimination and exclusion. I think if you promote such notions, like there will be peace among people. Why are people fighting? Because there are injustices and there are practices of exclusion and discrimination on whatever basis. So I think that's my answer. I don't know. I mean, I think as long as there's social injustice and discrimination, there will be no peace. So, peace is not just an idea. It's what's happening on the ground, what's happening in reality. If there's social injustice, then how can you have peace among people?
I have a real problem with the word peace because peace has been used politically, to the whole. The problem is that we are experiencing in the Middle East the peace process. It's been a long, discourse around like holding this idea of peace process creates a problem. So it's not and hides the real problems. So I'm having really hard, difficulties. That would be my answer.
And it seems that artists are always used to be the salve, the bandage, the kind of pacifier of very, very hard militaristic and economic overtures that are global. That is, there's a way in which war that happens at a very high level happens because not only nationhood, because of natural resource. And I think that I don't want to be leveraged. If peace is my ambition, to promote peace as an artist, and that's my ambition, great. But I don't want to feel complicit in a much larger political process and become the Band-Aid to a set of political issues and social issues that are actually unreconcilable, and that maybe I should be part of the disruption in.
I think we have time for one last question, if there is a last question. Yeah, there is a question here on the right. 5th, 6th row.
I have a kind of a meta question to the first two panelists, and it is regarding the putting activism discussion within an art fair. And I was amazed to see yesterday within the design show panels, decorative wall panels drawn with graffiti from quotations from Wall Street, from Occupy Wall Street movements, each 3,000 euros the piece. And my question is, of course, regarding branding and how to protect. On the other hand, is it necessary to protect because it's the way to spread it and occupy in a way? And my question to Yael Bartana, if she would like to comment on the her Berlin Biennial participation regarding this collaboration between movement and art institutions, which is quite controversial. It is cool that it's happening, really, for such an institution like the CAVE to invite such a movement, but these results that are more like confronting each other more rather than confronting the community. Somehow, this dangerous, like, kind of results, because I observed them for a couple of days and it was really quite controversial.
I thought about starting a corporation called Occupy Corporation that would sell T-shirts to occupants, and we would make millions and millions of dollars. This Occupy Corporation, we would sell protest bandanas and all of the marching accoutrement that you need to be a successful protester. We would have tents that had O in whatever city you were in. Occupy Seattle would be OS. Occupy Hong Kong, OHK. It would make billions. It would go public. Other corporations would want to buy in. Occupy Wall Street would become a subsidiary. Wall Street would become a subsidiary of Occupy Corporation. We would make so much money that everybody would have like a geothermal heat pad in their tent, and this would be very exciting. Then Wall Streeters would leave their jobs. They would come from heaven. They would occupy with us. We would be a regime unheard of. We would restore Palestine. We would have a bigger art fair. We would have a Occupy art fair in every city at the same time. We would.
You're great.
Anybody else wants to answer to the question? It could be a great conclusion to the panel. Would I not have always the urgent question, which I forgot to ask before, about your unrealized project? I kind of think we touched on so many things you're doing, which are very concrete, which are very specific, but we haven't yet talked about your unrealized project which has been too big to be realized, a project which has been maybe too small to be realized. There can be many reasons why a project is unrealized. There's obviously also censorship, maybe a project which has been censored. Or as Doris Lessing would say, she once told me there can be these projects which we have self-censored because we haven't yet dared to do them. So I was just wondering, as a kind of a final question, if you could, each of you, tell us about one project which is still unrealized.
Well, I'm still quite anxious about the online urban revolutionary dictionary. So it hasn't. We started it, but I don't know if it's gonna take off. So I'm anxious about that.
Theaster?
Yeah.
You're unrealized.
Hans, I think that you should start a church. I think I miss church so much, and there's nothing. I haven't found the right one. But if you were my pastor, this might be very special. So maybe I will build the Church of Art, and you will be my first prime minister.
That leads us back to Christoph Klingensief, who didn't build a church of art, but he built a church of fear. And Yael, you mentioned him, so what is your unrealized project?
I would like to go underground with my movement. I want to be functional, to hide actually somehow, to hide in a way that we can actually reactivate. So terrorism, one would say it's terrorist maybe to become terrorist, but of course it's the point of view of the nation state. But yeah, the idea is that to go underground, to go into the living in Germany, it's very inspiring for me to think of that. Yeah.
Thank you all very much. Thanks to Huda, thanks to Yael, thanks to Theaster, and thank you all for being here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.